Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic? Let's do it. What's the most surreal experience of your life? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I got to the airport at 3 in the morning with two of my friends. We're all pretty drunk. There's no one there, and we have a few hours to kill. So my friend takes out a bouncy ball, and we just throw it around the completely empty airport for an hour or so. It was the stuff that childhood dreams are made of. When I was 16, concluding the last day of my freshman year of high school, my car broke down on my drive home from school. I walked to a friend's house in the area to use his phone to call my parents to ask them what I should do. I had stayed overnight at my friend's house several times and had become trusted by his parents. I knocked on their door several times, but no one answered. I had seen my friend break into his own house several times by reaching through the mail slot and unlocking the back door. For some stupid reason, my 16-year-old self decided that it would be okay for me to reach through the mail slot and unlock the door so that I could use their phone. They wouldn't mind, right? I reached through the mail slot, unlocked the door, turned the handle, and walked right in. Immediately, a shadowy figure sprung from behind the door, pinned my throat to the wall with one hand, and pointed a shotgun at my eyeball with the other hand. I had no idea what was going on. I impulsively started trying to de-escalate the situation. While I was being choked with a gun pointed in my face, the assailant repeatedly screamed, "Don't, my family." Subsequently, I calmly convinced him that I wasn't a threat. As it turned out, my friend's older brother had just returned from serving in the military overseas. He was treated for PTSD shortly after this encounter. Travel with me to 1988 in Foxborough, Massachusetts. It's the middle of the afternoon and I'm wandering around the parking lot at a Great Dead show. I've been drinking and smoking, so I'm in a daze when this drop-dead gorgeous girl walks straight up to me and says, "Hi, remember me?" I don't. If I had dated her, I most certainly would have remembered. If I had asked her out and she said no, I would have remembered. I tell her I can't remember meeting her. She tells me her first name. It's me, Diane. Still no help. She tells me her full name. I still have no clue. She tells me our parents are friends, and she's been to my home a number of times. She knows my parents' and brother's names, and she even remembers my dog. I still have no clue, and now I'm starting to freak out a little bit. She goes on to recall specific visits to my house and things we did, e.g. a picnic at the beach, fishing at a pond not far from my house. I'm now asking my friends if they put her up to this, because she knows very specific things about me, and I have no idea who she is, and I'm really uncomfortable with this. After about 15 minutes of trying to jog my memory, which fails, she leaves. 20 years later, I can still recall this event, and to this day, I still have no idea who she is or was, nor does anyone in my family. I went to Nepal with my family when I was a kid. On the morning we left to go on our trek, we loaded up in a rickety old-school bus with all the Sherpas. We drove out to Kathmandu in the pre-dawn, which is the very beginning of the day's light. The Sherpas started playing drums on the bus, singing very strange songs. Outside of the windows, through thick fog, I could just barely make out a cloaked figure walking around. I could see the edges of buildings, shadows, and the occasional cooking fire. A few days later, I saw a big mountain for the first time. I'd been to the Rockies before, but they did not prepare me for this. I remember I crested a hill and saw a fishtail, Macha Puchare, 22,943 feet. My jaw dropped, and I felt elated, like I was flying, even though I was too stunned to move. I stood there for a few minutes, just staring at this mountain. Finally, towards the end of the trek, we were up in a snowy village tucked away in the mountains at about 8,000 feet. I went, for some reason, to hang out with the Sherpas and locals one night, and I ended up in a dark, circular room with a sort of bench going all the way around. The whole place was filled with Nepali hill people, and in the center there was a massive clay-domed stove. They were cooking dinner and laughing and drinking. I was by far the only foreigner in the room. My dad eventually came and found me, and he still tells the story about how astonished he was to find his son amidst one of the strangest human gatherings we would ever see. Anyway, it was hard to go back to suburban America after that. When I was about 16, I was strolling down the hill from my house to the local shopping center. It was a clear summer's day, and I remember being filled with teenage angst and thinking how nice it would be to have some sort of sign from God or the power on high. As I looked up the blue sky in front of me, letters started appearing. Johnny Walker. The S, second word, was nearly completed before I realized it was not God identifying himself to me, but a skywriting airplane doing an advertisement. I had to be at the end of my first, and at least for the time being, only shroom trip. I accidentally took was probably around 6 to 7 grams, and went absolutely batshit insane. The entire trip had this crazy narrative to it, and I know that I thought I died at least 2 times. The first time I thought I killed myself, but the second time, it was surreal. My friend went on this loop and just kept on repeating, "Be happy." He just kept at this over and over again. In my drug-fueled hysteria, I thought that it was the trip that was saying that, and I struggled to listen to it. Finally, I decided to let go of everything and just be content. I was convinced that even though I was going crazy, this had all some sort of higher meaning that I needed to figure out. That was when the trip effed with me the most. It replayed a fake memory for me. Apparently, according to this memory, the shrooms were fake, and we were all bummed out. When we were finally sure that they were fake, I tripped my chair back and accidentally fell backwards. My trip told me that I had died later due to severe blood loss and a concussion, and that my entire trip was just to make my consciousness accept dying. Psychedelics can be a scary business. If anyone wants the full trip report, I posted it on Shroomery under the same name. Reading about some of these trips from people is reminiscent. I mean, not that I ever did, but I know this narrator for this channel on YouTube that one time had an experience on a psychedelic where he was in his friend's pantry, and all of a sudden in a completely black room, a little spotlight opened up and a tiny miniature version of himself popped up in his hand, and he talked about the future, and he still remembers part of that conversation. Not that I know him, but you might. I've had a few. The first one that comes to mind right now was when I had my back tattoo done. This isn't a small tat. It's a tribal dragon from the top of my shoulders to just above my buttocks. Anyway, so the guy started doing the outline, and immediately I knew I was in trouble. The pain was excruciating. I'd gotten a tattoo on my arm before, and that felt like a tickle next to this horrible shit. It felt exactly like someone was taking an X-Acto knife, planting it blade deep, and pulling it down through my flesh. No exaggeration. I thought, oh my god, there's no way I can make it through this, and started scheming about changing the whole design so we could stop ASAP. Great. Like, I really want a tramp stamp above my butt. It was not really an option, so I kept going. I thought I was going to die. Worst pain ever by 100. It went on for more than an hour. I wish I could have been unconscious. I kept telling the guy to take breaks and let me breathe, but it was ridiculous because obviously it didn't help and was just prolonging the horror. Then I started playing around with my mind. This was out of utter desperation. Every time I saw him dip the needle in ink, I was tensing in fearful anticipation. Out of nowhere, I told myself to look forward to the pain instead of cringing, to relax my body completely. I somehow managed to do that a little, and the next time it hurt noticeably less. This was incredible to me. Short story short, it took me 30 full minutes to achieve it, but I managed to relax myself completely and to have no mental aversion or fear of the needle whatsoever. And when I achieved that, I felt zero pain, just a little pressure. It was 100% night and day. I felt like I should publish this in newspapers and call all managed pain centers, etc. with my discovery. I even tested it by making myself fearful again during the next ink dip, and sure enough, it hurt like all hell again. The funky thing is that on my next session, coloring in, even though I knew it was going to work, it still took me 30 minutes to achieve that relaxed state. It's hard to fight against things that are hardwired in you, like an aversion to pain. Anyway, the whole thing was and still is totally surreal to me. I'm not even sure I could repeat the experience. The end. I was on a 2-lane freeway on-ramp pretty late at night, concrete barriers on either side of me. I floored it and switched lanes in my rear-wheel drive car to get around some slow drivers. My car started fishtailing, which had never ever happened before. I tried to counter-steer, then counter-steer again and again. The car was making the most horrible noise I've ever heard. The steering wheel felt like it was being jerked by an invisible hand much stronger than my own. Then the car went into a spin, and I was quite certain that I was going to crash into the side of the on-ramp and maybe even hit another car. I imagined my wrecked vehicle, disappointed parents, and cops taking down their report that I had been drinking. I had a drink earlier. Even if I wasn't over the legal limit, I knew I was stupid. I was so regretful at that moment, regretful that I was driving recklessly, regretful that I had had a drink, regretful that I had thrown away a perfectly good car to pass one guy on one on-ramp. Amazingly, my car had ultimately done a 180-degree turn and had come to a stop roughly 6 inches from the concrete barrier. No collision. There were 3 other cars around me, the one I had passed and the 2 others I was now facing. It was so surreal. Seeing headlights on the on-ramp, seeing cars that were stopped for me, and they just waited patiently as I got myself turned around in the proper direction on this narrow on-ramp. I had such an adrenaline high right after that my entire drive home felt like I was on drugs. I was shaking as I drove home at about 50 miles per hour in a 65 mph zone, nearly petrified. In any case, I vowed never to drive like a dumbass again, and I've kept that promise. I've actually never had an accident, or even so much as a speeding ticket, in over 12 years of driving. Aside from shrooming in a dust storm at Burning Man, I'd say top of the list was when I tripped on salvia. I fell backwards into nothingness, just blackness. I didn't exist. Then came red. Then more colors. Then 3 dimensions and shapes. And then I was alive. I existed again, and I could see. I could hear things, noise. They were people. I could see their shapes. Who are these people? I knew them. They're my friends. I'm in a room. I just did drugs. Oh shit. Get me off these drugs. I'm freaking out. 3 minutes worth of what the I was in the Air Force and stationed in France for 3.5 years in the 1960s. I was driving my Triumph Spitfire back to the radio relay site where I worked and lived. It was located on a hill between 2 small towns. The night was balmy and I had the top down. The road was very twisty, and the only outside light was a very bright moon. I came to a sweeping right-hand turn, one I had driven 100 times before. I was not speeding. Right in the middle of the turn, a wild boar was in the middle of the road ahead, running straight at me. I yanked the wheel to the left to avoid hitting it, and the car fishtailed to the left. I caught it, but the car had slid partway off the paved part of the road onto the grass verge. The car was still moving left, half on and half off the road toward the drainage ditch. I turned to the right, hoping to keep the car on the road, but the back end dropped into the drainage ditch, and I slid along, half in, half out of the ditch. As I was sliding along, I happened to notice the wild boar in my rear view mirror still running up the road. Just then, the boar stopped, turned around, and seemed to look right at me. Everything was moving in slow motion. In a flash, it seemed I was looking down from a point above and behind the whole scene, watching the whole thing in real time. I was connected to myself in the car by a thin, glowing thread. I saw the car sliding along, with me fighting the wheel to regain control, and the boar standing in the road watching everything. Then the rear end of the car was hit by a culvert, popped up back on the road, and stopped, just as if nothing had happened. I was still viewing this from above and behind it. Aside from the glowing thread, it was like watching a movie. The boar walked up next to the car and looked in. Bingo. I was back in the car, face to face with the boar. I could see his tusks gleaming in the moonlight. It seemed like we sat there looking straight into each other's faces for several minutes. Then the boar turned and started loping down the road in his original direction. I started the car up, and drove to the site. I was not on drugs or booze, as I had been designated driver for the evening and had just finished dropping everyone off. That's it. I've had several similar experiences since the first time. Several months after the proceeding happened, was sent on a TDY assignment to the Golden Garden spot in Southeast Asia, the last 12 days, with enough time and memories to last what at that moment seemed to be a very short lifetime. These events are a constant source of wonder for me. I was about 12, leaving the bowling alley with the church group, and a kid came up and forced the woman leading us to the group to pay the money. Everyone scatters, and I'm just sitting there watching it play out. She hands over the money and is screaming and crying, and he is pointing the gun at her from like 2 feet from her head. He keeps trying to pull the trigger, but it never fires. He hits the chamber a few times like he's trying to clear a jam, and then he hears people coming out of the theater after him, and he splits. I'm not saying I believe in divine intervention, but I could never forget it. I bought a secondhand wardrobe and put it in my bedroom. That night I woke up to hear the wardrobe violently shaking, and I'm not just talking like creaks and what have you. I'm talking full on bang bang bang. It kind of sounded like somebody was inside trying to get out. I couldn't see in the dark, but I felt very sure that this was going to die that night. I had visions of the wardrobe doors swinging open and banging shut like something at a poltergeist. Eventually, the whole thing just stopped, and it never happened again. I still haven't been able to explain it. At first, I thought it must have been an earthquake, but there were no reports at the time. So I'm filing this report as one of my unexplained events. Walking around Amsterdam, I was very high and very lost on a very foggy evening. We kept walking around in circles, Blair Witch style, seeing the same landmarks over and over again. There were these pubs that seemed to be on every corner that looked exactly the same. It was dead silent, except for the occasional bicycle bell ringing. When I became depressed, I was living in an apartment on the 14th floor of a building myself. Most of my food came in the form of frosted flakes, purchased at the plaid pantry at the base of the building. I would sit in bed and think about the meaninglessness of life for hours at a time. 9/11, duh. There was this TV program hosted by a local street performer that I would see around town. It was surprising to see his face on the screen. He was wearing a red sequined shimmer blazer with Mickey Mouse ears on his head and a disembodied plastic hand on his left shoulder. He said, "If I were you, I would head to the fridge." One late Saturday night around 2 a.m. I was sleeping when my phone rang. I woke up and sleepily answered it. It was a girl crying and yelling at me for various things I did, including cheating on her. I had no idea who this girl was. I wasn't her boyfriend. It turns out her boyfriend had cheated on her at a party, and she had gotten the number wrong. I ended up talking to her for about 20 minutes, telling her that her boyfriend is a dick and he wasn't worth it. I still can't remember if it was the dream or not, but I still have the record of the call on my phone. This was last week. I was in my living room playing computer games during a storm. The storm starts to break a little, and I look out of the left window and it's sunny. Look out the right window and it's raining fairly hard with intermittent sun. I went to a party of a friend's girlfriend or something like that. I'd never met them before. The first surreal thing is that the majority of people at this party were foreign exchange students from Kazakhstan. They were very nice people, but also very into their gambling. It happened that the person's roommate works at the docks, and this evening he decided to bring back some dock workers for the party. A few of them were Russian. Long story short, it's 3 a.m., I've drunk half a bottle of vodka, and I'm sitting in somebody's I've never met before's house playing poker with some Russian dock workers and a few Kazakhstanis. I think I'm the third person to mention Burning Man, and I have to admit it's the most real experience of my life. However, one particular instance stands out. I went to watch a friend in my village play an accordion show at an Irish pub-themed camp at dusk. Good atmosphere. Then a group of people who roam the show played Dress Like Santa Claus, walked in, and the mood and music changed from Dead Kennedy covers on the accordion to Christmas carols on the accordion. The whole place was singing along, including myself. I remember thinking it was the end of August. I was in the middle of the desert, in an Irish pub, and I was singing Christmas carols to a guy playing the accordion. The whole time, I was on my first LSD trip. I was 19, and it was the first of many out-of-this-world experiences of Burning Man.